They stand in gold, and they do not move. A silent legion, a living wall, a finality wrought in oromite and flesh. Light breaks upon their pauldrons, and is reforged into a halo of pure imperial authority. To see one is to witness a myth made manifest. To see a host of them is to behold the very concept of victory given form. They are the final argument of the emperor, the last measure of his power, the unbreachable, unthinking, unyielding defense of the sacred. They are the Adeptus Custodes, and this is the foundational lie upon which 10,000 years of imperial faith has been built. For they have been breached, they have been broken, they have been found wanting. The gold is not a proclamation of victory. It is a shroud of remembered failure. Every gleaming surface is a mirror, reflecting a singular eternal regret. They are called the 10,000, yet this number is not a measure of their strength, but the scale of their shame. They were created for a single purpose, to be the perfect shield for the master of mankind. And on the day that mattered most, they failed. Their perfection is not a state of being, but a penance. Their silence is not discipline, but a perpetual mourning for a war they lost, before it was ever truly won. Everyone speaks of their invincibility. No one speaks of the cost of the moments it was proven false. For in the silent heart of the galaxy, upon the throne world itself, the Emperor's chosen guardians watch over his broken body, and they remember. They remember every crack in the shield, every brother fallen, every inch of ground ceded. They remember that they were not enough. To understand their failure, one must first understand the impossible standard to which they were held. They were not made as the Space Marines were, mass-produced from raw genetic stock and hammered into legions. Each custodian was, and is, a bespoke work of art, a masterpiece of bioalchemy crafted from the infant scions of Terran nobility. Where a Space Marine is a blunt instrument, a custodian is a rapier's edge, possessed of a strategic and tactical acumen that makes even a chapter master seem a novice. Their minds are fortresses, their reflexes are precognitive, and their very souls are forged with a particle of the Emperor's own light, rendering them all but immune to the temptations of the warp. During the Great Crusade, they were not soldiers. They were extensions of the Emperor's will. They were his companions, his counselors, his final sanction. They fought at his side, not as a legion, but as individual demigods, each a master of blade, bolter, and forgotten Terran martial arts. Their golden armor was not merely a defense, but a symbol of the golden age they were building, a promise of the enlightened future that awaited humanity. In those halcyon days, a single custodian was deemed sufficient to turn the tide of a compliance action, to decapitate an alien empire, or to stand judgment over a rebellious primarch. Their annals speak of Captain General Constantin Valdor, who could debate philosophy with Magnus the Red and then defeat him in a sparring match moments later. They speak of Diocletian Koros, who single-handedly held the Gate of Ashes against an orc wog. For a full solar day, his guardian spear a blur of incandescent death. These were not mere warriors. They were the living embodiment of the imperial truth, a secular reality made manifest in demigod form. They knew no fear, for they had seen the master of mankind face down gods and bend reality to his will. They knew no doubt, for their purpose was absolute, and their creator walked among them. They believed, with the certainty of a physical law, that they were infallible. The Imperium was an ascendant dawn, and they were its morning stars. This absolute certainty was their greatest strength, and the seed of their most profound tragedies. The first tremor in this foundation was a footnote in the grand epic of the Crusade, a detail lost to all but the most obsessive chroniclers and the long, unforgiving memory of the Custodes themselves. It was the matter of the Proximan Betrayal. The world of Proxima Major was a center of xenotech worship, a culture of human scientists who had delved into forbidden arts alongside alien allies. The compliance was deemed a matter of singular importance, and a shield host of the Custodes was dispatched. They moved with their customary terrifying efficiency. They did not conquer Proxima, they dissected it, dismantling its armies, its leadership, and its blasphemous technologies with surgical precision. But something went wrong. In the aftermath, a handful of custodians, those who had spent too long studying the captured Xeno artifacts, began to exhibit deviancy. It was not corruption in the chaotic sense, not a fall to ruinous powers. It was something colder, more insidious. It was a philosophical infection, a belief that the Emperor's vision was too limited, that the alien technologies they had destroyed held a potential that humanity should embrace, not shun. They turned upon their brothers. It was not a battle, it was an execution. The traitors were cut down without ceremony, their names expunged, their armor melted down. But the damage was done. The perfect weapon had shown it could be turned against its master. The incorruptible had been corrupted. It was a small, quiet failure, buried under the triumphant march of 1,000 other victories. But for the 10,000, it was the first crack in the mirror. It was the first time they had to confront the possibility that the flaw was not in galaxy, but within themselves. This quiet horror was soon to be eclipsed by a war of such magnitude that it would forever scar the soul of the Imperium, a conflict fought entirely in the shadows, unknown to the teeming trillions its outcome would save. When Magnus the Red, in his hubris and folly, shattered the psychic wards of the Imperial Palace, he did not merely break a physical structure. He tore open a bleeding wound into the very heart of mankind's future, the Emperor's Webway project. This was to be humanity's salvation, a network of arcane tunnels through reality that would free it from the perils of warp travel and the predatory gods who dwelt there. In an instant, it became a gateway to hell. Demonic legions, the unholy armies of the ruinous powers, poured through the breach, not into the physical reality of Terra, but into the delicate, crystalline corridors of the Webway beneath the palace. The defense of this impossible front fell to the only force on Terra capable of even comprehending the threat, the Adeptus Custodes and the newly formed Sisters of Silence. This was the war in the Webway, and it was a meat grinder that consumed legends. This was not a war of glorious charges and tactical maneuvers. It was a desperate, claustrophobic nightmare fought in non-Euclidean tunnels against creatures of pure madness. The Custodes, beings of perfect order and logic, were pitted against the very essence of chaos. Every victory was Pyrrhic, every foot of ground gained paid for, with the lives of Legiu heroes whose names would never be known. The golden armor of the 10,000 became blackened and cracked. Their guardian spears, which had slain alien tyrants and monstrous beasts, were now used to hack through tides of gibbering, shapeless horrors. For years they fought and died in this secret hell. Entire shield companies vanished without a trace, overwhelmed by sheer numbers or driven insane by the raw immaterium. They fought alongside the Sisters of Silence, whose null aura was the only thing that kept the demonic tide from becoming an unstoppable psychic tsunami. Together they formed an impossible alliance of gold and gray, sound and silence, fighting back-to-back against infinity. The casualties were staggering. The Custodes had been bled of nearly half their strength by the time the Emperor himself entered the fray. To seal the breach. When the dust settled, the Webway gate was sealed, but at a terrible cost. The Emperor was forced to commit himself to the Golden Throne, no longer a walking god, but an enthroned psychic lighthouse. The dream of the Imperial Webway was dead, and the Adeptus Custodes were shattered. They had won, but they had lost everything that mattered. They had held the line, but the cost was their master's freedom and humanity's future. The 10,000 were no longer 10,000. They were a remnant, a ghost of their former glory, their ranks decimated by a war no one else would ever know they had fought. The weight of this secret victory was heavier than any defeat. It was the moment they transitioned from conquerors to jailers. Their duty was no longer to expand the light, but merely to contain an encroaching, eternal darkness. The Golden Age had ended not with a bang, but with the silent, grinding horror of a war, fought for a future that could now never be. The scars of the Webway had barely begun to heal when the true cataclysm arrived. The Horus Heresy was not merely a civil war. It was a betrayal that struck at the very soul of the Imperium. For the Custodes, it was the ultimate test, the moment for which they had been created. As Horus Lupercal's traitor legions descended upon Terra, the Custodes prepared for their final duty. They were the last wall, the final shield. They would not break. But Horus did not intend to break them with force alone. He sought to break their spirit. The siege of Terra was a masterclass in psychological warfare as much as it was a military campaign. The traitors brought with them the full, terrifying power of the Chaos Gods, warping reality itself, turning the soil of Terra into a corrupted hellscape. Demons walked the battlements, and traitor Astartes, swollen with profane power, crashed against the palace walls, and the Custodes bled. They died on the walls, in the starports, in the sanctums they had guarded for centuries. For every traitor they felled, 10 more took their place. They were demigods fighting an ocean of hate. They watched as the Imperial fists, their staunch allies, were ground down to nothing. They saw heroes of the Great Crusade fall to blades dripping with warp fire, but their resolve did not waver. Their purpose was singular: protect the Sanctum Imperialis, the final gate before the Golden Throne. Yet, even here, in the heart of their fortress, failure found them. The treachery of the Blood Angels at the Mercury Wall, the sheer, overwhelming press of Angron's World Eaters at the Eternity Gate, each was a crisis that brought them to the brink. They were forced to cede ground, to sacrifice bastions, to make impossible choices. Their perfection was ground away by the sheer, grinding attrition of the siege. They were being overwhelmed, not outfought, not outmaneuvered, but simply buried under the weight of a galaxy's hatred. The final, unforgivable failure came in the war's climax. The records are shrouded in myth and contradiction, but the truth is inescapable. The Emperor, in a final desperate gambit, teleported aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. With him went his most trusted sons, Sanguinius of the Blood Angels, Rogel Dorn of the Imperial Fists, and Constantin Valdor, Captain General of the Custodes. They were scattered upon arrival. The Emperor faced Horus alone, and he fell. By the time Valdor and Dorn reached the throne room, it was too late. Sanguinius was dead, the Emperor was mortally wounded, and Horus stood triumphant. In that moment, everything the Custodes stood for was rendered meaningless. They had been created for one task, and they had not been present for its ultimate test. Valdor, the greatest of their number, the Emperor's most trusted companion, was not at his side when the killing blow was struck. He could only watch as his master was interred within the arcane machinery of the Golden Throne, his living body a sacrifice to keep the Astronomicon lit and the demons at bay. The heresy was over, the traitors were routed, but the Custodes had lost. Their vigil had failed. The master of mankind was a broken corpse on a gilded throne, and they, his perfect guardians, were now the eternal wardens of his tomb. The shame of that moment would define them for the next 10 millennia. It became the silent, screaming core of their existence. In the long, dark centuries that followed, the Adeptus Custodes retreated into shadow and dogma. They became known as the Companions, a title steeped in bitter irony, for the one they were meant to accompany was now silent and still. Their duty became a self-imposed penance. They would guard the Sanctum Imperialis, and they would not stray. The Imperium they had helped build crumbled into a decaying, ignorant theocracy, but they did not intervene. They watched as the High Lords of Terra squabbled and schemed, as the Inquisition hunted and purged, as the memory of the imperial truth was twisted into a religion of fear and superstition. They did nothing. Their failure had been so absolute that they had lost faith in their own judgment. Their mandate was singular: guard the throne. Nothing else mattered. This rigid monastic existence was tested as never before during the period known as the War of the Beast. A species of orcs, larger, more intelligent, and more technologically advanced than any previously encountered, erupted from the void and brought the Imperium to its knees. Worlds burned, fleets were annihilated, Vassai lords assassinated and replaced by orc ambassadors. Terra itself was threatened by an attack moon teleported into orbit. It was a crisis on a scale not seen since the heresy, a threat to the very existence of mankind. And throughout it all, the Adeptus Custodes remained within the palace. They did not sally forth. They did not lend their strength to the beleaguered Imperial F-Fists or the newly formed Death Watch. They stood their silent vigil, guarding a corpse while a house built around it burned to the ground. Captain General Gerontius, the leader of the Custodes at the time, was implored, begged, and even threatened by Lord Commander Courland of the Imperial Fist to join the fight. His refusal was absolute. He argued that the threat of the beast, was secondary to the endless secret war they still fought against incursions within the palace itself, against the psychic echoes of the heresies. He argued that their duty was to the emperor's physical form, and that to leave the palace would be to abandon the one vow they had left. In his mind, it was a question of priority, a cold and logical calculus of duty. But to the rest of the Imperium, it was seen as an abdication, a profound and damning failure of purpose. They possessed the strength to turn the tide, to save untold billions of lives, and they chose not to. They were so consumed by the shame of their ancient failure that they committed a new one, a failure of inaction, a failure of spirit. While the Imperium fought for its life, the Golden Giants stood guard over a memory, their perfection rendered impotent by self-imposed chains. They were no longer the Emperor's sword, but merely the lock on his crypt. For 10,000 years, this was their state. An order of monks, prisoners of their own grief, polishing their armor and practicing combat arts they would never use outside the palace walls. They were a living museum, a relic of a brighter age. Their numbers, once shattered by the Webway War and the heresy, were slowly replenished, but their purpose had shrunk. They were no longer the 10,000 companions. They were the 10,000 jailers. Their watch was eternal, but it was hollow. They guarded the past, with no eye toward the future. They had become perfect in their small, defined task, but in doing so, had lost the grander vision for which they were created. They were a flawless machine, executing a pointless function. The galaxy could burn, humanity could teeter on the brink of extinction, and, as long as the Sanctum Imperialis remained secure, they would consider their duty done. This was the long slumber, the great shame, a self-inflicted wound far deeper than any blade could carve. They had traded relevance for ritual, and in doing so, had failed the Emperor's dream just as surely as Horus had. Then the galaxy broke. The Cicatrix Maledictum, the great rift, tore across the cosmos, a maelstrom of warp energy that split the Imperium in two. The light of the Astronomicon was shrouded, and a new age of darkness began. And for the first time in millennia, the war came to Terra's doorstep not as a distant threat, but as a physical reality. Khorne's legions, led by the greatest of his bloodthirsters, manifested in the orbital plates above the throne world, and even within the palace itself. The demonic incursions were a direct assault on the Sanctum Imperialis, a violation of the Custodes' most sacred duty. The wards held, but they buckled. For the first time, since the heresy, the blood of demons and the ichor of the warp stained the hallowed halls of the Emperor's fortress. This was a failure of a different kind. For 10,000 years, their vigil had been predicated on a single assumption, that as long as they stood guard, the inner sanctum was inviolable. The Great Rift proved that assumption false. The enemy was no longer at the gates. It was inside the house. The demons manifesting on Terra were a symptom of a galactic sickness so profound that no wall, no matter how well guarded, could keep it out. Their 10,000-year watch had not been enough. Their self-imposed isolation had not kept the throne world safe. It had only made them blind to the true scale of the threat gathering outside. They had perfected the art of guarding a single room, while the universe that room existed in was collapsing. The appearance of demons within the palace was the ultimate indictment of their long watch. It was proof that their strategy, their entire philosophy for 10 millennia, had been a catastrophic miscalculation. They had won countless, unrecorded skirmishes in the shadows of the palace, but they had lost the strategic war for the safety of the throne. It was this ultimate, undeniable failure that finally broke the spell of 10,000 years. The arrival of the resurrected Primarch, Robut Guilliman, acted as the final catalyst. He walked into the throne room, a ghost from an age of glory, and he looked upon the Custodes not with reverence, but with a profound, sorrowful disappointment. He saw not saviors, but relics. He saw an order that had allowed its grief to become its identity, and he gave them a new order, an order that was in truth their oldest one: fight. He argued that the only way to truly protect the throne was to take the battle to the enemies of mankind, to push back the darkness that was now lapping at Terra's shores. To be a shield, one must face the blow, not hide behind the person one is protecting. For the first time since the heresy, the great gates of the Sanctum Imperialis swung open. For the first time, the golden hosts of the Adeptus Custodes marched forth not as individuals or honor guards, but as an army. They were unleashed upon a galaxy that had largely forgotten they even existed outside of myth. This was not a triumphant return. It was an act of desperation, an admission that their previous course had led only to ruin. Every battle they now fight across the stars of the Imperium Nihilus is an act of atonement. They are not fighting for glory or for conquest. They are fighting to undo the damage of their own inaction. They are fighting because they have finally understood that the greatest threat to the Emperor was never a single traitor at the gate, but a galaxy allowed to fall into darkness while his guardians stood by and watched. Their new war is not for the Emperor's life, but for his legacy. They now fight with a cold, terrifying fury, a fury born of millennia of repressed shame. They are the Emperor's wrath made manifest once more, but it is a wrath tinged with desperation. They know that they are too few, that they have returned to the fight too late. The Imperium is a shattered wreck, and they are but a handful of golden giants trying to hold it together. They face enemies that their ancestors could scarcely imagine. Tyranid hive, fleets that blot out the stars, Necron dynasties awakening from eternal slumber, and the ever-present, ever-hateful legions of chaos, now more powerful than ever before. In this new age of war, their individual perfection is often not enough. A shield captain, who can slay 100 traitor marines, may still be brought down by 1 billion ravenous tyrannids. A host that can shatter a demonic legion may find itself helpless before the reality-warping technologies of the Necrons. They are learning the painful lesson that individual martial prowess cannot always overcome strategic reality. They are learning to lose again. The weight of this new age is etched upon the face of their current Captain General, Trajan Valoris. He is a pragmatist, a student of history who understands the full scope of his predecessor's failures. He carries the burden of Constantin Valdor's shame at the siege, Gerontius' paralysis during the War of the Beast, and the long, slow decay of purpose that defined the millennia in between. It is Valoris who now sends his brothers out into the dying galaxy, knowing that many will not return. He pores over intelligence from 1,000 war zones, making the cold calculations that his order refused to make for so long. He is a warrior, a general, and a historian of failure, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Yet even he is haunted by the knowledge that it may not be enough. The forces arrayed against mankind are simply too vast, the wounds of the Imperium too deep. He is dispatching demigods to fight a war of attrition they cannot possibly win. And so, the tragedy of the Adeptus Custodes is complete. They were created to be perfect, and their only unforgivable sin is that they are not. They are a monument to a dream that died, and their every action is an attempt to rekindle a fire from cold ash. They are the strongest, wisest, and most loyal warriors ever created by the hand of man, and yet they stand as the ultimate symbol of insufficiency. They are defined not by their countless, unrecorded victories, but by the handful of catastrophic failures that shaped the fate of the galaxy. Their golden armor does not signify hope. It is the color of a setting sun. When they march to war now, they do so with the full, terrible knowledge of their own limitations, with the ghosts of 10,000 years of regret marching alongside them. They stand in gold, but now they move. They are seen on 100 worlds, 1,000 battlefields, a golden tide holding back an ocean of night. Yet their true post remains on Terra, in the silent chamber where their master slowly dies. They have left the palace, but the palace has not left them. Every warrior fighting on some distant, forgotten moon is still in his heart, standing vigil before the golden throne. Their war is not to build a new future, but to preserve a dying present, to buy one more day, one more hour for a shattered Imperium. The silence that surrounds them is no longer just the quiet of discipline. It is the silence of a man on the gallows, contemplating the fall. For they know the truth that the rest of the Imperium cannot bear to face. The shield is cracked, the wall is breached, and the long night is finally here. And they, the Emperor's own Golden Legion, are all that stands in the way. They were not enough then. And they know, in the silent places of their ancient hearts, that they may not be enough now. But they will stand anyway. That is their curse. That is their glory. That is their eternal, unending penance.